All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into late 18th century France. But we're not just looking at it as a country. Think of it more like a massive societal pressure cooker that is just begging to explode. It's really the ultimate story of what happens when everyday people are pushed completely to the brink and decide to topple one of the most powerful, deeply entrenched regimes in human history.
Okay, I want you to imagine this for a second. What if 97% of an entire country, basically almost everyone, had absolutely zero political power? No voice, no vote, nothing. Yet they're the ones forced to foot the bill for absolutely everything. Sounds like a total meltdown, right? Well, for millions of French citizens living under the old regime, this wasn't some hypothetical thought experiment. This was just daily life.
Let's set the stage with Section 1, the unequal old regime.
So back then, King Louis XVI was running the show as an absolute monarch. I mean, whatever the king said, went. He had zero checks on his power. And society itself was rigidly split into these three distinct classes, or estates. The third estate, which was the commoners, made up a staggering 97% of the population. They vastly overwhelmingly outnumbered the other two groups, the clergy and the nobility. But despite being literally almost everyone, they had practically zero say in how their country was run.
And here's where it gets truly wild. The first estate, the clergy, and the second estate, the nobility, they held all the top jobs in society. And their biggest perk? They paid zero taxes, literally nothing. Meanwhile, that massive 97%, the commoners, the peasants, the factory workers, the merchants, they shouldered the entire tax burden of the nation. You literally had the poorest people in the country subsidizing the richest.
So, as you can guess, things were boiling over. You had the bourgeoisie, this educated middle class. They were the economic engine, making the money and driving the economy. But they were completely boxed out of any real political power by the nobility. Then, at the same time, you had a brutal subsistence crisis hitting the lower classes. We're talking years of terrible harvests that caused bread prices to skyrocket so high, a single loaf could cost a peasant a whole month's wages. Extreme hunger plus intense political frustration, that is a very, very dangerous mix.
Which brings us to Section 2, Sparks of the Revolution.
You know, a collapse like this doesn't just happen overnight. It takes a perfect storm. On top of the crushing taxes and starving citizens, France was practically bankrupt. They were drowning in debt from foreign wars, including helping out with the American Revolution, by the way, and it completely drained the royal bank accounts. Combine that financial disaster with a super indecisive King Louis XVI, massive public anger over Queen Marie Antoinette's lavish spending, and a sudden, massive wave of radical new ideas.
And right in the middle of all this misery, you have the Enlightenment thinkers throwing a match right onto the powder keg. You've got John Locke talking about natural, unalienable rights. Jean-Jacques Rousseau pushing this, at the time, totally wild idea that power actually belongs to the people, not a divine king. And Montesquieu arguing for a separation of powers. These weren't just polite high society chat topics. They went viral. They were revolutionary concepts challenging the very existence of an absolute monarch.
So how does it all kick off? Let's get into Section 3, the Bastille and reforms.
The breaking point finally hits in early 1789. The king is completely broke, so he calls a meeting of the Estates General to try and fix the economy. But the Third Estate quickly realizes the voting rules are completely rigged against them. So what do? They just leave. In an incredible act of defiance, they break away. The king's guards lock them out of the meeting hall, so they literally occupy a royal indoor tennis court, swearing a historic oath not to leave until they've written a brand new constitution for France. And that political defiance? Yeah, it spread like wildfire right into the streets. On July 14th, furious citizens in Paris stormed the Bastille. Now, this wasn't just some random prison break. The Bastille was a massive, heavily armed fortress. It was the ultimate, physical symbol of the king's tyranny, and the people violently tore it apart, virtually brick by brick. It signaled the total end of the old world, a moment so huge they still celebrate it in France today as Bastille Day.
The dominoes started falling incredibly fast after that. The old, centuries-deep feudal system abolished almost overnight. The new National Assembly drafted the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen, which boldly guaranteed free speech, property, and fundamental equality. By 1791, the absolute monarchy was officially dead, replaced by a constitutional monarchy, where the king, finally, for the first time, had to answer to the law.
Sounds like a happy ending, right?
Well, not quite. Let's look at Section 4, the Reign of Terror.
See, the pressure cooker was still boiling. France was dealing with active wars against neighboring kingdoms and massive economic chaos at home. The constitutional monarchy pretty quickly fell apart, and France was declared a republic, meaning a government actually elected by the people. But it also brought a terrifying new instrument to the stage, the guillotine. It was actually originally designed as a humane Enlightenment innovation for quick execution, but it rapidly became the ultimate symbol of bloodshed.
It's actually dizzying when you look at the timeline. In just 4 short years, France went from simply asking for basic representation in 1789 to completely abolishing the monarchy in 1792 to the shocking, totally public execution of King Louis XVI himself in 1793. The revolution was spiraling completely out of control, moving way beyond its optimistic beginnings into something a lot more dangerous. And that plunges us right into 1793 to 1794. A brief but intensely dark chapter.
During this period known as the Reign of Terror, the revolution basically turned on itself. Led by a deeply radical leader named Maximilien Robespierre, extreme paranoia just gripped the entire nation. The guillotine was working overtime in the public squares. Tens of thousands of people were executed. Honestly, anyone even suspected of opposing the revolution, or just not being enthusiastic enough about it, could be arrested and killed after a total sham trial. This nightmare really only ended when Robespierre himself was outmaneuvered and sent to the exact same guillotine he'd been using on everyone else.
So, how did we get out of this, and what did it all mean? Section 5, the Revolution's Global Legacy. Eventually, everyone was just completely exhausted by the terror. That chaos and instability left an opening for a brilliant military general, Napoleon Bonaparte, to step in and seize power in 1799. But if we step back from all the bloodshed, the outcomes of this revolution were an absolute game-changer. It permanently proved that everyday people could dismantle an absolute monarchy. Those radical ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity, they spread like crazy, inspiring democratic revolutions all across Europe and the rest of the world.
So I'm going to leave you with this to chew on. When you look at the political rights, the free speech, and the basic equalities we absolutely rely on today, how many of them were forged right there, in the explosive fires of 1789? It's pretty wild to think about. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.